All right. Theology Thursday.
Take 2.
Yeah. This is a long video. We're discussing You're Not Your Own by Alan Noble. We made a short video kind of with the basics. And so we had a lot more to say. We had a lot more we could say. And so we decided to make a longer video kind of expounding on that stuff. So we're discussing Introduction Chapter 1 still. Next week we're going to do Chapter 2 and 3. And so we're not really summarizing this. We're assuming everybody's read what we've read.
In this longer video, we're not really even going to be exploring specifically what he says in the book, but instead kind of unpacking some background material, at least from our perspective. He may disagree and say that's not where I was coming from, but
yeah. And we're coming from different perspectives because, I have degrees in psychology. And
I have degrees in pastoral ministry, theology, that sort of stuff.
And so we've got differing backgrounds here. So let's start with talking about the introduction here. He talks about surviving versus thriving. So what does God have in store for us?
Yeah, which raises in my mind the question, are we living intentional lives, or are we just kind of making our way passively through the world? Are we actively navigating the world, or are we just kind of alive and moving along, or are we dealing with only what is urgently in front of us, whatever urgent issue of the day, whatever's right in front of us, vying for our attention at any given moment, or are we trying to live a more intentionally focused, directed, navigated life? And an easy way for us to check our priorities, because that is kind of a priority question, is for us to ask some pointed questions of ourselves and to answer them as frankly and honestly and candidly as possible. Questions like, where do my resources go? Which you could think of that in terms of the resources of my treasure or the resources of my time. Where do I spend what's in my wallet? What's written actually in pen on my calendar rather than just penciled in.
Things.
Yeah. I'll pencil that in.
Yeah, unless I have something better come up. Thanks.
Yeah. So, in some of what he discusses, I think it raises he actually at the end of the introduction, I think, does cite a number of other sources where you could explore some of these ideas in more detail. And one of those, if I'm not mistaken, was C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man, correct?
Yeah.
It's at the end of the intro.
He actually does That Hideous Strength.
Oh, yeah.
Which is my favorite.
It's the same book.
Yeah, it's the
Abolition of Man
version.
is the essay version, and That Hideous Strength is the fictional version.
And that's where Ransom got his name. Ransom's been our camera guy today.
Yes. So one of the points that seems to be either directly or indirectly being made or assumed maybe is that in trying to control nature, we've become, in fact, controlled by nature.
Yes. And that isn't just like an us versus them kind of thing. Like Christians are not this way, but the world is. Because I feel like Christians get in the habit of doing things to try to manipulate God. Like we think if we do the right things, God's going to do the things we want him to do. Mm-hmm. And so we think...
we kind of mechanize spirituality or whatever. Yeah.
And so if we're not careful, we're going to end up like the Israelites who complain.
We're going to battle. Go get the Ark of the Covenant.
No, I was talking about when they're out in the desert complaining that they want meat, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, God won't even give us meat," and so He gives us so much they choke on it and start dying. God gave them exactly what they asked for.
Yeah.
And so I feel like sometimes we, not just trying to control nature, but Christians try to control God. We think that we can do that somehow.
Yeah.
So then he also mentions total depravity, which is Methodist. It can become like a heated word because that's them other folks' thing.
Yeah.
But does the Methodist doctrine give us a little more hope in the situation of an inhuman world? Or,
Yeah, so...
You gotta suss that out because that's the theology.
To be clear, I do believe that Methodists, Wesley especially, we believe in total depravity. We may define it a bit differently than our more Reformed or Calvinistic brothers and sisters. And one of the ways that it's not a defining of total depravity, it's the but of total depravity. We have a very high and optimistic understanding of God's grace. And I know our Reformed brothers and Calvinist brothers and sisters would say, yeah, but so do we. We've got the doctrines of grace and whatnot. But we do have a very optimistic understanding of God's grace, in that God's prevenient grace, or God gives prevenient grace to all people. And not only that, but his grace is able to completely and utterly transform like the totality of our lives, both heart and life, by the renewing of our minds, by the recreating of the divine image in us. And that's something that we optimistically expect in this life, not just at death. And so while the idea of living in an inhuman world and being broken vessels in an inhuman world can be quite like an unbearable burden, I think we as Wesleyans can't despair because of it, because we know that God, the God who created all things, can also recreate and renew all things. He will recreate, but even now in this life, his desire and ability is to completely transform us and through us transform even culture.
Yeah. If you hear screaming in the background, that is Sue Ellen.
Yeah, sorry about that.
They live here.
So on page 5, he on page 5 he says this. He says, self-medicating is the norm in our society, because if we don't medicate, we're not sure we can get through the day. Ouch.
And I feel like most people would say, oh, that's definitely not true. I don't self-medicate. But if you read through the list that he gave, do you scroll endlessly? Do you find yourself watching way too much TV? Like, I feel like his self-medicating is more of a coping mechanisms. Do you find yourself needing to read fiction to kind of escape? Like, you overeat? Do you obsess over food, calories, and exercise? Like, are you trying to fill your days and measure your life in a way that makes it bearable? Like, just to get through, you know? Like, a lot of people think, like, you know, taking that vacation is going to be the change we need, or getting that new house is going to be the thing that we need that just makes life just boop. And it's going to be the same, just in a different place.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what I always say about vacations. Like, it's the same, it's just a different place. I still have to do all the same things.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think those are what he's talking about self-medicating. I mean, I think he is talking about literal self-medicating, with meds. You know,
and he does
drinking,
briefly address that, but more than that, far more than that, he addresses things that we don't think of as self-medicating, because that's not
basically
medication.
We are intentionally distracting ourselves to try to make it.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway, so then we get to the thesis of this book on page 5, which is that he says a proper understanding of our personhood requires that we recognize we are not our own. At our core, we belong to Christ. So I guess that's kind of what we're going into for the book.
Yeah.
So moving into chapter 1.
So he does raise or offer for us four examples that suggest that our world is inhuman, and I would venture to say these are probably just random things that he's highlighting. One is the idea of the rise of a group of people called the incels. It's very, I think, a very derogatory term. I don't know, if
I don't really, as a lady, I don't have much to say about that.
Well, I remember the first time I ever...
I don't have any understanding of that.
I remember the first time I ever heard the term. I read it. It was a friend commented on Facebook and referred to himself as being called that term, and I thought, oh gosh, that's like horribly offensive.
But I feel like they've taken it as their own.
Maybe ironically so. I mean, Methodists took the term.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're Methodists. We took a derogatory term and made it our identity.
Yeah. But he talks about even stay-at-home motherhood, which was interesting.
And I've personally, of course, struggled with that because I've been a stay-at-home mom for, let's see, Imogene just turned 18, and I became a stay-at-home mom a few months before she was born.
Yeah.
So it's been a little over 18 years now. So there's the external pressure, that he talks about, and the economic pressure that he talks about because, our world is not built for single-income families. But there's all this, for me, I feel like it's more of an internal pressure from the inculturated like ideas and values, like growing up, the things you learn about like what success means and what success is, the you're wasting your degree or you're wasting your life kind of things.
Yeah.
I feel like those are the things that I struggle with more, that stay at home, like because of those internal ideas that have been so like ingrained in me. Feels like I'm doing nothing all day, even when I never stop.
Yeah.
So I do, like, I clearly identify with that one.
It's like Foghorn Leghorn. I resemble that remark.
Yeah.
So you've got mental illness. He discusses mental illness and kind of works through that a little bit.
Which I don't understand how. Which this is not in our notes at all.
Yeah.
This is just. I don't understand at all how we have come so far with mental illness and mental health care, and yet more and more people are so much worse off. Like, it seems like everything we do is like not working. And I know the research shows that like certain things work and certain things don't work. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of research into like which forms of counseling work and which forms don't work and what about this works. And so there's all of those things that work, but more and more people are more and more mentally ill. And more children are more and more mentally ill. And I don't think it's an issue necessarily of like, oh, well, we identify it better now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's that. I think we're just like, and I don't necessarily know that all of it's mental unwellness. I feel like a lot of it is spiritual unwellness.
Yeah. Which, I mean, the two are tied together in many ways.
Because psychology is the study of the soul.
Yeah. So, not a psychologist, not a medical expert at all. I know Noble does, I think he does place a high premium on mental health and mental, therapies seeking to produce better mental health and whatnot.
And I feel like we all do. It's just at some point you have to look and say,
I would be curious to
what
have.
we're doing working?
Well, I do wonder to what extent some of that is we have done what we do with all other aspects of life, and we've commodified even mental health. We're viewing mental health through the lens of a highly consumeristic culture. Right. We've capitalized on mental health. And it's also tied, and I'm not dismissing like mental illness. I'm not dismissing diagnoses or anything like that, but we've tied that into our sense of identity. Like, who are you? I'm a bipolar person. I'm a depressed person. Yeah. Part of my dressing and how I project myself into the world is through my melancholy, or and so I do wonder to what extent you cannot separate or isolate mental illness from the problems of this inhuman world, and how much have we created industries around it where there's a vested interest in these again, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I think there is a rabbit hole there.
I say, as a counseling school dropout, I probably have a ton to say.
Yeah.
But
so the fourth, I think we've maybe not dodged any landmines there. Probably. But so he does talk about unsustainable consumption, which is which you could even say, okay, as the mental health industry, is that an unsustainable consumption?
Right. Because I feel like counseling,
yeah.
one of the things that bothers me about some counseling is that it is unending. You have to rely on your counselor. You never become your own. And there are some forms of counseling, clearly, that the goal is for you to become your own counselor. You can deal with your problems yourself. You don't have to get somebody outside to help you. But a lot of counselors, even if that's the type of counseling they say they practice, they don't necessarily encourage people to help themselves. Like,
yeah. And to be clear, you and I have both gone to counselors.
Oh yeah.
We have. we have. And I still would.
Oh, absolutely.
I do recommend counseling to folks. I also, we both, to some degree, we do some pastoral counseling. And so he is not talking about counseling and therapy in his discussion of unsustainable consumption. Instead, he's talking about like the use of plastics and recycling and all that industry and whatnot. And on page 14 he does
that's kind of a side, he kind of went back to the counseling thing a little. He did. A little bit.
Yeah, page 14 he says our kids are not all right and the rest of us aren't doing much better. I love Noble's way of writing. I really do.
He has a lot of single line quotes.
Oh my gosh.
And then so if you don't follow him on social media, you have to follow him on social media. You have to find him on Instagram. He's Alan Noble on Instagram.
I do frequently share his memes, his self-portrait memes or his selfie memes.
He's so demotivational. It's great. It's great. Our teens love it. So on the note of our kids are not all right, the rest of us not doing much better. If you're really interested in that topic, I finished not too long ago. You can answer it. Abigail Schreier's book, which she's not a Christian.
Yeah.
But her book, Bad Therapy.
That just came out, right?
It was not long ago.
Yeah.
If you want to look into that a little deeper, it is mainly for parents, I would say. I did not expect that going into the book. But she talks about that issue of our kids are mentally unwell and why are they mentally unwell. And so she kind of dives into that. And I don't agree with her 100% on everything she said, but I do think she asked some important questions and kind of uncovers some important rocks there.
Yeah, so on that note, depression and antidepressant use, he does address that a little bit.
A little bit. And so for some people, like, antidepressants make sense. For some situations, it makes sense. But for many others, you can kind of see that it's just a lifestyle issue, that their life is making them depressed or anxious. That it isn't always, I know we always tend to think depression is chemical imbalances in the brain, which that theory came from the assumption that we basically started giving SSRIs to people who were depressed. And we're like, oh, if that makes some of them better, then clearly serotonin's the issue. But then once we're able to actually measure brain chemistry, we're like, oh, wait, their serotonin levels are fine. So we were kind of
propagandized to believe that, in the same way that we were propagandized to believe that eggs are bad for you because of cholesterol, but then propagandized that there's the incredible edible egg and margarine is better for you because butter's bad, fat's bad.
It's one of those things where
red meat, stay away from
where we know this thing cured some people or made it better for some people, and so we kind of assumed the reason, and maybe we made some wrong assumptions there, but we kind of don't know. So depression typically comes from two sources. When it's not chemical, like sometimes there's like hormonal depression that comes with like postpartum depression, things like that. But a lot of depression comes from two sources, and that would be the loss of control or the loss of meaning, where you can't control the things that are happening in your life. You have no control over your housing. You have no control over your job. You just feel like everything else is happening to you.
Which does,
instead
like,
of you're actively
Yeah.
living your life.
And
Like,
that is intricately tied together with our sense of meaning and value
Right.
and purpose and direction. And,
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is loss of connection, loneliness. The less connected we feel to people, the less people that we have that we can count on, that we can rely on, the more depressed we will feel. And so I feel like those two things are a lot of the stuff that Ellen Noble's talking about in this book, is that we do have that loss of control and the loss of meaning. We're trying to invent ways of meaning to just cope. And then that loss of connection.
And those are two of the three, if memory serves me correctly, those are two of the three factors that play heavily in, like, self-harm and suicide risk,
Right.
and whatnot.
And the loss of control, like, some of those, that's some ways that, like, cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior, some ways that those help is by basically shifting your perspective that things aren't happening to me. I'm not out of control. I am controlling the things that I'm choosing to control, that I'm doing the things that I'm intending to do. And so just knowing that, hey, I'm in a bad situation because I made bad choices, seems to make it a little bit more bearable than the world's against me.
Yeah.
So
I don't recall if he even, and I did read I've read the book before, read it a couple of years ago, but I'm rereading it with you all, I don't recall if he actually used this term, but there is a term that kind of is bumping around in my head, at least behind the introduction in chapter 1, and that is the term existentialism, which is a worldview, right?
Right.
So what is a worldview?
Oh, that's for you.
Oh, all right. So
I mean, I could tell you.
What is a worldview? How would you describe it?
I always describe it as it's the lens through which you see the world. It's your glasses.
Yep.
You don't see your glasses, but you see everything through your glasses.
And you don't even notice if there's, like, a bend and
no.
whatnot.
Well, I mean, I do, because I'm crazy when it comes to glasses. Like, I cannot do dirty glasses.
Yeah, as the lens through which you see your world, it's how you understand reality as whole. It's how you understand truth,
Right.
how you understand how we access truth, how you understand relationships, how you understand yourself, the people around you.
Yeah, it's how you answer all those big life questions.
Yes. What is this? Where do we come
Truman
from?
Show
What
questions.
is? Like, who am I? Who are you? Was anything real?
Right.
Those are the questions. Yeah, and so everyone has a worldview, and our worldview is it's kind of dynamic. It's adjusting as we make our way through life and whatnot, and as we as we make decisions and build relationships and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of always being adjusted, but. Give us a little history of existentialism, where it comes from, and why it would be important in this conversation.
Okay, so before the Enlightenment, the Christian worldview, theistic worldview, is basically the predominant worldview.
At least in the Western world, yeah.
Right. Then that gives way to deism, which deism said, oh, there's likely a God, but he isn't personal and he isn't present. Basically, he created all this, set it into motion, and he just left.
The watchmaker.
Yeah. He's off somewhere doing his own thing. We're here to figure it out ourselves. So you actually see this in a lot of the founders of our country, unfortunately. But then deism then gives way to naturalism, where they just are like, okay, let's forget the God part. Like, what we see is what there is.
Yeah.
Like, there's no God. There's nothing beyond what science can prove or disprove. Of course, naturalism, then the natural result is nihilism. Because if this is all there is, there's nothing supernatural, there's nothing more than I can see, nothing is permanent, there's no God. When I die, there's just nothing, there's no hope, there's only what is.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it is. So nihilism is kind of crushing. No one can really live as a nihilist. You have to, like, stop halfway through and live the halfway mark. You can't just keep going to the end of nihilism, or else you'll go crazy, pretty much. So existentialism then emerges. And existentialism then kind of marries naturalism and nihilism. And it basically says that also there's two forms of existentialism. Yeah. There's atheistic existentialism, and then there's theistic existentialism, which is Soren Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the atheistic version, because the theistic version of existentialism was actually a response to the church and
kind of nominal Christianity.
Yeah, nominal Christianity, and how it had become like very depersonalized. Yeah. So that's a different thing that happened. But atheistic existentialism basically says there are two realities. You've got objective reality, naturalism, the things we can see.
Yeah.
And then you've got the subjective reality, which is basically my life.
So you've got like the world of facts and the world of values, or
the world
faith,
of experience.
The facts and faith, or you've got the secular and the religious. It's kind of a
split.
Yeah.
You've got the world that is, and then you've got the world that I see. And those are different things. And so in atheistic existentialism, the world that I see is the most important. But they also say that nothing has meaning.
Yeah.
Nothing is of inherent value. Nothing has an inherent meaning.
Like objectively.
There's no objective meaning.
Sure. There are no objective values. There are only subjective values.
Because science can't give value.
Yeah.
Like, science can only tell you what is. It can't tell you what ought to be. It can't explain.
It answers like how, not why.
Yeah. There's no meaning in science.
Okay.
There's no value in science. And so it's the subjective that gives meaning. And basically we create that for ourselves. We create the meaning for our world, and that becomes the highest truth. Your subjective reality and atheistic existentialism is more important than the objective reality. That's like you have to have some trump card, and that's it.
Yeah.
So then, of course, that gives way to postmodernism, which gets rid of the objective reality altogether and just has this subjective reality of the world is what I make it. Things mean what I say they mean. That sort of thing. Of course, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And so most people today don't go the postmodern route entirely. You may have some like artist somewhere trying to live a postmodern reality, but it's just kind of it's not really sustainable or logical.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of gone back to more of an existentialism, I feel like, in our culture, just because we want to keep that postmodernity of I make myself, but we also have to acknowledge that there are facts. Well, there's a world that just exists, and trees grow how they grow, and it doesn't matter how I think they should grow; they're going to grow how they grow.
Yeah, and some even I've not read an awful lot on it, but some even use the term meta-modernity to speak of kind of where we are now. If indeed we have passed postmodernity, well, what's next? If postmodernity is a reaction to modernity, then where are we? And so they've curated this term meta-modernity, and meta-modernism is essentially like a willingness to live within kind of the irony, the jadedness, the suspicion and subjectivity of postmodernity, yet with a desire for the benefits of modernity. We want something that has true objective value and meaning, and so we know we live in a world that's not. A way to measure our lives, a way to validate our lives, a way to a way to kind of anchor and root our lives, to tether them to something that is strong and meaningful and objectively true. Yeah.
And most scientists never went the way of postmodernism because you really can't.
Yeah.
So no scientists stayed naturalists or deists, depending on what branch of science, I guess. But it was more of the humanities and the humanistic that kind of went to postmodernism.
Yeah, so in atheistic existentialism, you create your own meaning in your own life, your own way of being in the world. And with that will come, I think, like necessarily will come existential anxiety as you live authentically, which is the big buzzword. And as you determine your own path without a trail, without a guide. You're just trailblazing yourself. It'll also lead not just to existential anxiety, but to existential guilt, which I think Noble alludes to when he says no one can absolve you or pardon you.
Right. So there's a whole branch of psychology. There's existential counseling. But in existentialism, a mature person will look and see that all of their actions affect everybody else. Right? The butterfly effect. Right? When I go and buy shoes, I support something.
Yeah.
Usually here, that means I'm supporting slavery on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Because I buy shoes that I can afford. So my need for shoes directly causes suffering on the other side of the world. If I am immature, I will make excuses.
Okay.
I will use coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms to justify that action. That I didn't know, I didn't understand. Like, how was I supposed to know that's what the shoes came from? They didn't
We
tell
trusted
me.
Nike.
There wasn't a stamp
Adidas.
on it, right? So I'll make excuses.
Yeah.
But if I'm a mature person, according to existentialists, I'm going to accept the guilt because I'm going to accept the responsibility for my actions. That I am responsible for that.
That's what adults do. You accept the responsibility.
That I personally am responsible for someone else being enslaved, right? So I can't absolve myself of that guilt because it's something that I did and I chose to do, and I'm responsible. Even if I didn't know the ramifications then, now you do, and you're responsible. So for existentialists, the existential guilt is a necessity. You can choose to avoid it by your defense mechanisms, but essentially
you can take up cobblering and make your
make
your own shoes.
Essentially, you just have to live with the guilt.
Okay.
That the weight of your decision is yours alone to bear. For existential therapists, that is just a natural part of being human, and that is not something to overcome. That guilt is just something that you are expected.
It's just
to
the
just
given.
bear.
It's the given.
The existential anxiety of I become nothing. Every decision I make affects everybody else. The guilt that comes with I made a decision that hurt somebody else. I don't even understand how to live in this world. You know, that show The Good Place?
Yeah.
Where it was like, there was no decision that anybody could have made that would be good enough because the world had gotten to such a point. But for existentialists, they just say, that guilt is just us. We you bear it, you live with it. That's just on you.
Put on a brave face.
Take responsibility for your actions, and, you bear the guilt because the guilt is yours. And there's no escaping it. But for Christians, we would say absolutely have the personal responsibility, right? We would say we should absolutely do everything reasonable to avoid harm to others. But we also acknowledge that human condition is not ours alone to bear. Yeah. That there's hope, that we're not bearing it alone. We're not bearing the crushing weight of the world alone. And we're also not going to bear the crushing weight of our own sin. That there is alleviation from that guilt. And that there is like a new path to walk. Yeah,
well, through radical pardon and new birth and sanctification. Yeah. Okay.
So we would agree with the existentialists saying you absolutely have to take responsibility for your actions, and no amount of excuses are going to make them go away, right? But we would say, but there's hope. You don't just have to bear the guilt. Yeah. You don't just have to bear the anxiety. Yeah. Like, there's more. But
it's also...
The guilt is yours.
Yeah. But it's also not just like kind of a dismissal. Like, none of those things really matter because I've been forgiven. It's not that. There is the call to take up our cross. There is the call to, as Dr. Matt Friedman says, run to the sound of the pain, to alleviate suffering, to come alongside others who are hurting and suffering, to plead the case of the poor, So it's not like, oh, well, it doesn't matter because I've been forgiven. It's all under the blood. There is work to do, but there's like kind of a hopefulness to that work.
And there's a hopefulness, and there's like, yes, you have to take up your cross, and yes, you have to bear your burden, but then in community you have others that are bearing your burden with you. Yeah. You have Jesus who says, take my yoke, it's light. And he takes ours, which is too heavy. So. Yeah. I feel like the Christian worldview gives hope to that reality.
Yeah.
That responsible, guilty, whereas existentialists are just like, yep, you gotta deal with it. You make decisions every day that affect other people in ways that you can never imagine, and it's probably not all good.
It's terrible.
And you just gotta suck it up and live with that. The Christian worldview says, no, you don't have to suck it up and live with that. Like, you can actively make decisions and do things that actually help people, but you also don't just have to bear the guilt and the burden alone.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to this next point, away from the existentialism, since that's, not everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
I can talk about worldview a lot, but I won't. So self and the attention economy. So it would be easy for us to say that the attention economy is a product of social media. But it's been around for a long time, right?
Social media is a really good boogeyman. I like picking on social media.
It is, especially as people who didn't grow up with it, and then seeing it, we see the changes.
Yeah.
But we also see that attention economy was a thing before social media. I think if you guys in the 90s where y'all would like cruise the strip, and like the guys would get in their car and they would like cruise for girls, and the girls would always like, get all dressed up to sit in the McDonald's parking lot or something. To get attention. That's attention economy, right?
Yeah.
That whole scenario, which I'm sure also happened, like, I guess drive-ins in the 50s.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking. Yeah. So social media obviously did not create the attention economy. Right. In fact, what it really did was it put the attention economy in our pockets. No longer do you have to get ready.
Took the community out of it.
It took the community. It radically changed our understanding of community, because now we have digital community, which is ironic because we're
making a video.
But if you think about it, you don't have to get ready to go get attention. You don't have to.
Oh no, you can use a filter.
Yeah.
You don't even have to do your makeup.
You don't have to shower. You don't have to put on deodorant. You don't have to leave the house. I mean, the attention economy is right there, accessible to you, like at all times, even while you're sitting on the toilet, but on your phone.
It also means that there's not a place for it.
Okay.
Because like cruising the strip back in the day was a Friday night activity.
That was after you got paid and the
payday,
work week was done.
Weekend.
Yeah.
That was a Friday night thing. That there was a place, there was a time. All the other time was not.
You got to be home by 11 or 12 or the attention economy instead is spilled over into every part of our lives. There's like not a moment out of the day where we're not vying for attention with not just thousands. Well, if you think of just your Facebook friend list and the friends that they have and all that sort of stuff, you're talking thousands or whatnot. But you are talking about millions upon millions of people that are just vying for attention from anonymous others.
Yeah.
In this like vacuum of social media.
Yeah.
And that's not just like an anti-Facebook thing, an anti Twitter thing, or an anti-TikTok or Instagram thing. I mean, if you think about all of the ways social media is, all of the ways, because we normally think of that in a very small, limited category. I think of it in a very expansive category. What are all of the ways in which my relationships with others is mediated specifically through technology? And so you are talking phone calls, even you're talking.
But nobody calls on the phone. Other
you're
than
talking texting.
You and Chris,
you're talking
y'all
emailing.
Talk on the phone too much.
Yeah. You're talking Zoom. You're talking Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's all of the ways that technology is a part of my life, facilitating and mediating my relationships with others.
Yeah. Well, I think
that's ubiquitous. It's every part of my life now is done through the lens of social media.
Well,
or lived through the lens of social media.
And thinking of it just in terms of like the platforms, I feel like platform is a good word.
Okay.
Because I feel like social media, like everybody builds a stage.
I was going to say, how is it not a stage?
It is. It's a platform.
Okay,
everybody builds a stage to perform the magnum opus that is themselves.
Yep.
You are your own play or whatever.
I curate my identity. I perform and project.
But then there's no audience. There's just all these other platforms and stages, and everybody's just performing, and there's never an audience.
You're not even gonna watch. They're not even gonna watch the video. Like,
hopefully,
they'll watch a few. They'll watch a few
video.
seconds and be like, "Okay, keep swiping."
Yeah, you just
like, oh yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, I know what they're saying. I know what they're gonna say. I know what they're gonna say.
Yeah.
And then you just move on.
Yeah.
But everybody's performing. Like nobody's watching.
Yeah. So value. How does value tie in here?
Well, with the shifting sands of everybody building their own truth, I don't know how we ever find common ground. Like, how can you agree that life is valuable if you have to quibble over, like, well, what's human life? What qualifies as human life? Are we talking all races? Are we talking all genders? Are we talking preborn? Are we talking old? What about people who just don't want to live anymore? Like, so then
are we talking about people on the other side of the planet who have different ways of doing life than I do?
That are making my shoes?
Yeah.
Like, so we say, okay, we're going to argue over what is human life. And then we're going to argue, if I say human life is valuable, we're going to argue over what does valuable mean. Like, and are we saying, it's
intrinsically valuable?
And are we saying, does everyone have equal value? Or what is it in Animal Farm? Did you just read Animal Farm? Oh, no. All pigs are equal, but all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Yeah.
Like, are we going that route? Like, and so we can't even define terms to get us onto a common ground.
So on page 30, he then drops the line, "I am my own, therefore I owe no obedience or submission to anyone."
Yeah. And I think that as Christians, the temptation is to say, that applies to them. Like those that are not Christian, or those that, for whatever reason,
aren't a part of
we feel aren't Christian.
Yeah.
Protestants, though, specifically reject any authority over their lives. Like, it's a thing. Just me and Jesus is kind of their motto. Our theology has been adapted to our hyper-individualistic culture so long that most of us don't even see, like, churches getting rid of their denominations or hiding who they're affiliated with.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a form of, I'm not in submission to anyone. You know?
We don't identify as that, Baptist, even though we may be a part of that.
First Baptist is now the vine. You know, that's just a totally facetious example. I don't know that that's an actual church, and if that is your church, I'm really sorry. But like our churches don't want to be in the denominations anymore. The churches are throwing out accountability structures. Like, I've heard of a couple churches who don't even have a church board. Like, the pastor just does whatever he wants to do.
Well, because all those things are just like human constructs.
It's accountability.
And so let's get rid of all those trappings and
number one,
and humanly construct our own thing
Number one, they're in the Bible, but
denominations
aren't, but like accountability structures.
Yeah,
and like I think for that poor pastor, like the weight of the whole church is on his shoulders. He's got to make every decision. When things go bad, he's the only person that's accountable. Like, this is terrible. Anyway,
he does the branding. He is the brand.
Right. It's like, that's horrible for him. Some people
or her.
Some people are throwing off. They're just throwing out those who are called to serve. Okay. Like, they're doing church with no pastors.
Okay. Gotcha.
Like, just no accountability. Like, it's literally me and Jesus and whoever wants to come meet me at my house while I lead them, which then makes them the pastor.
Yeah. Well,
even if they don't call themselves that.
The people who start the non-expert, like, we're not using the commentaries type thing, they become the expert.
But then create a commentary that's entirely wrong. Oh Absolutely. My gosh. Don't even get me started on her.
Oh gosh.
So, like, we have this me and Jesus kind of feel, and like, the Bible is personal. Like, the gospel is personal. It's very personal. But you're not alone in that. Like, we have come to view the Christian life so much as a journey and not as like...
Which it is a journey.
But it's not, but it's a thing we're journeying together.
Yeah.
You know, like...
The journey is not alone.
Right.
But we do perceive ourselves as like kind of the first person we are the hero in our own
Right.
story, and everyone else is kind of just
Are you trying
interchangeable
to talk
parts.
about one of my favorite songs?
Huh?
The cinematic.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it's that sort of thing. Whereas, like, the Booths would have said, "Oh no, we're not. The Christian life is not a journey. We're in an army marching."
Yeah.
And so,
it's not an army of one.
It's a journey, but that's a different kind of journey. And so we're in the company of others.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the community of believers. The Holy Spirit works in us.
And if you're not,
but
you
through
should be.
us.
Yeah.
Like the Holy Spirit isn't just working in us, and then we're just sitting there by ourselves being filled with Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
The Holy Spirit also works through us, which means that sometimes for the Holy Spirit to work in me, it comes from someone else.
Yeah.
Because it's coming through someone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like those gifts are coming through another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just, oh, God's filling me. It's God's filling me and He's filling them, and we're overflowing onto each other in different ways.
They're being mediated socially. To
Yes.
turn a phrase.
Yes, the Spirit is mediating our sociality.
Yes, for others. So on page 32, he drops the phrase, or it's a clause. Measurability is the key.
Right.
Right.
That we're trying to reduce harm. That's how we view morality, and measurability is the key.
Okay.
So one of the things that brought to my mind personally is how guilty is the church of doing that. And we talked about this last night in our small group a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
When we were doing Dr. Chris Lorstorfer's book, Learning to Breathe. I don't have it around me.
Yeah.
But that's a different thing. But we talked about the church, like, do we base what we do in our church on measurable goals?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we just doing what Jesus told us to do? Like, sometimes Jesus told us to do things that just don't have measurable ends.
Yeah.
Right? So, but as a business, I guess, the church tends to think that, like, this outreach program needs to achieve X goal for it to be a success or for it to be worth it to us.
Yeah.
Right? So, we just arbitrarily choose some numbers. But I just wonder how much of kingdom building is just an immeasurable thing.
Mm.
Like, how are you going to measure that?
Yeah.
Like, my parents got saved at a tent meeting
Mm-hmm.
In 1989 at a tent meeting. And so, like, the measurable goal was 2 adults and a kid show up at a tent meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, like, how much of the impact of that is just immeasurable out a lifetime?
Yeah.
More kids born, like,
that
going
kid grows up and becomes a pastor's wife,
going
and
into the
has own
ministry,
kids.
and then having more kids. Like, those
Yeah.
are immeasurable things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's more than just this couple.
Well, that they're at least immeasurable from our perspective. Like, they will be measurable, on the other side, so to speak.
And we were talking about, like, just how much, like, spiritual growth. How do you even measure that? Like, kind of like mental health. How do you measure mental health? And it's like, I guess you just ask people, like, are you mentally healthy? Like, how you feel on the inside? But, like, how do you measure spiritual growth other than, fruit?
I'm reminded of a very dark line from a Me Without You song. But, yeah.
So, but at some point, like, we make those calls that this ministry is not worth our investment of time or money.
Yeah.
We shut down things when numbers just don't bear out anymore.
Even when the numbers are bearing out, if they're not bearing out enough, we'll shut it down.
The entire churches will just be shut down when there are believers there.
Yeah.
There is a solid group of believers, then they can continue, and those believers are growing.
They're growing and multiplying, but maybe not.
But not multiplying the
fast
way
enough
you want them
to justify, like, the bottom line for the.
Or they're multiplying in their growth and not in their, like, numerical how many people are showing up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like,
multiplication can be at more ways than one, right?
Yeah.
So at things like our ministry at Devereaux.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if am I allowed to say this on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they've got a website.
Okay.
So Devereaux is a behavioral hospital for youth, for children and youth ages 12 through 18, and we do a ministry there on a monthly basis as a church.
Yeah, we have a birthday party.
Yeah.
kids
for the kids who are having a birthday,
right.
celebrating their birthday while they're,
hospitalized
for behavioral issues.
Right. So that has there's nothing easily measurable about that ministry. It is going to bring no measurable metric in a business sense.
Yeah, because we do measure, like, how many volunteers showed up from the church, how many kids who were hospitalized there were a part of the birthday party, how many adult staff members from the hospital were also there. Those are measurables, but what impact we had,
you can't measure that.
There's no way of knowing. And the immeasurable impact of it is even things that for like a 12-year-old kid, you don't know where that kid's going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and what maybe even small, even forgettable impact, because that kid may not even remember, that birthday party, that one person who sat and talked with me and asked me about myself and whatnot, that's kind of changed the trajectory of my life, and I didn't even realize it at the time. So the impacts, the values are really immeasurable.
Yeah, and sometimes you go and there's like 2 kids because all the rest of them lost their privileges and can't
because of further behavioral
issues. And so you think, well, gosh, we brought this
what a failure.
We brought this whole cake for 2 kids, but like for those 2 kids, does it not matter that somebody loved them enough to celebrate their birthday this year?
Yeah.
And
let them eat cake.
And so my question then is, like, do we take our call seriously enough to do it even when the metrics don't play out?
Yeah. Well, and if funny,
or we don't recognize any immediate benefit.
Jesus' parable, or whatever you want to call it, of the sheep and the goats, from Matthew's gospel, whatever you did or did not do to the least of these, you did or did not do to me. Yeah. He talks about the orphans. He talks about the imprisoned. He talks about the sick. He talks about the lonely, all those sorts of things. None of those things are like,
can you go tell them to
have the results, like have the, like, to what end, like, why go visit the imprisoned, like what
what goes to do, and
exactly
as Methodists,
and how does that affect the bottom line?
Those are kind of our heritage things.
They are,
is taking care of orphans, widows, visiting the imprisoned. Like those are kind of what Methodism was built on.
Yeah, and not just Wesley famously said, don't just expect the preacher to do it. Like, you go do it.
Oh, yeah.
You are the one that is going to stand accountable before God in the end. What did you do? Not just what did you give money to do, what did you send somebody else to do, but you yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's discuss insecurity.
Okay.
But especially like a lack of being able to measure things, and find value in those measurables. That does bring up insecurity, I would think.
Yeah.
So he, on page 33, he being Alan Noble, on page 33, he says, if I am my own and belong to myself, then any and all associations, ties, and relationships I have are voluntary. Again, very freeing, but there's a burdensomeness that comes with that as well. Because the converse means that all people in relationship with me are also voluntary. They can leave me at any time. Mm-hmm. And so the result is a perpetual sense of untetheredness and insecurity. Like, I'm just kind of floating through life trying to grasp onto something that is anchored, but even that is untethered and therefore unanchored and floating through life. So very kind of vulnerable and insecure way of being.
Yeah. Well, in my marriage and family therapy class, one of the really truly disheartening things among these future Christian therapists was just a complete inability to define family. Like, we're in a class called Marriage and Family, and like no one can even define what a family is.
Okay.
Because it's so cultural. Like, I mean, if you look at the Bible, the ancient Near East.
Who are my brothers?
In the ancient Near East, their family to them would not have meant mom and dad and 1.5 children, right?
Yeah, sure.
But in our modern times, mom and dad and 1.5 children isn't even family. It's just a non-fixed group. It can just mean whatever,
Yeah.
which makes it a completely useless term.
Yeah.
If a family can be anything, then it's nothing. You know?
Yeah.
So a lot of the older generation, they kind of have mom and dad and kid is the family, but then once the kids move on, like they're just done.
There is no family. It's just
us,
a couple again.
Right?
Yeah.
Their job's over, the role's ended, you know?
Yeah.
But then in younger generations, you have people opting to just, oh, my family is my friends. You know, because I don't like the political views of my actual family, and so I make a new one with people that I have political views that I like, you know? And so you just kind of define it differently. And I mean, honestly, in our economy now, I feel like the traditional nuclear family option, the mom, dad, 1.5 kids, I feel like that's going to be a thing of the past.
Yeah.
Because, you know, neolocation is too expensive. And neolocation is when you get married and you form a new household.
Gotcha.
So it's not matriarchal, it's not patriarchal, it's neolocal.
Gotcha.
Like the you make your own. So you don't move in with family. But it's getting so expensive, and marriage rates are on the decline, that all those things are just going to be a thing of the past. Like you're going to start seeing families that are just a lot different than what it was when we were kids. So that's more of a rant than an answer, I guess.
So Noble then says on page 35, he says, the modern person belongs everywhere and nowhere at once.
Yeah. We feel this responsibility everywhere, but we don't fit anywhere. We feel like that we have this obligation for connection, like everyone's got their little twitchy thumb. Like you're obligated to answer that text right now. You're obligated to answer that email right now. You're obligated to like be at everyone's beck and call, but you're not really connected to any of them.
That even like, I don't know if you thought about that. I didn't think about that when I was doing or think of this whenever I was doing the reading, but I'm thinking of it now. Even like the feeling of oughtness to get behind every cause.
Oh, yeah.
If something breaks news,
and
like you feel like you've got to
say
something,
everything.
And that's part of like projecting. And like if you haven't said this, if you haven't condemned that, if you've not stood up for this, if you've not hashtagged that, then you don't care. But it's all of these like urgent, immediate, like you got to get behind it. You got to really shake down this problem and stand in solidarity with that group and whatnot.
But you're not ever a part of any of them.
Yeah.
Like you have to have something to say about everything. You have to always pick a side, even though you're not a part of any of this.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're always watched, but we're never like seen. That we're just lonely in a crowd.
Yeah.
You got people who, in real life and digital life, you know, you've got people who are sitting in a room full of people feeling completely alone.
Yeah.
Because they have no connection to
And often that even happens at church.
Yeah.
Like you show up, you're a part of the crowd.
But we don't connect.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
There's a difference in sitting next to someone and connecting with someone and living life with someone. I think Dr. Chris said in the last chapter of Learning to Breathe, which I know that's weird to bring up and talking about a different book, that he made the distinction that it's not just attending church, is being involved,
participating in the life of a church.
Sticking around for that potluck, which our potlucks are top notch.
Oh gosh,
I normally hate potlucks because
where did this come from?
I've been to a lot of bad potlucks. But our potlucks are like next level.
Oh yeah.
Our church can cook. Ransom agrees. Our church can cook. We got a potluck this past Sunday.
There was not a thing on the table that I avoided. There was not a thing on the table that I did not eat, which is very unusual.
Yeah.
Very, very unusual. And not only that, there weren't like three different green beans or three different mashed potatoes.
It was a good variety.
2 different cornbreads or whatever. I mean, it was a variety of stuff, and I had some of everything, and I would have eaten seconds or thirds of everything.
I would definitely encourage.
I did eat seconds and thirds of a lot of stuff.
Anybody that's local to us should definitely consider coming to our church just for the potluck.
Just for the food.
Just
the food is worth it.
The food, yeah. Anyway, so that has nothing to do with this, but
Well, it does to the
Sort of.
extent that like we were created for community, we are starved for community, and we live in a world that is like completely atomized and atomizing, and that is like it's a terrible burden, a terribly burdensome way of living in the world. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
it isn't human.
Yeah, it's not. But the good news is that you are not your own.